Red Bull and the budget cap. It's been the big talk of the season last year. But recently, there have been some new scoops about last year's budget cap. Could Red Bull have overspent again? Or are there other teams that have misjudged their spending last year? Let's find out what the grid has to say about last year's budget cap and who could possibly receive the penalty. F1 boss Stefano Domenicali confesses he's more than nervous about learning the results of last year's budget cap submissions, which were due on March 31st. Red Bull was found guilty of exceeding the budget limit in 2021, with the team overpaying by $2.2 million on their path to the Drivers' Championship. They received a monetary penalty of $7 million, as well as sporting punishment of 10% of their R&D time for 2022. But with the opponents protesting that it wasn't enough, it's unclear if the next set of penalties, if any, would be tougher. On March 31st, the team submitted their budgets for 2022. Now it's a matter of waiting to see what the cost cap administration reveals. Domenicali confesses to being worried. As he should be, any overspending would result in another penalty and the teams aren't going to take it lightly. "I'm more than nervous," he told Sky Sports. "I'm pretty sure that everyone understands now what the effect is if there is a breach, and I totally agree that the focus on this will actually be very big. I think that is a point of attention mainly for the credibility and to check if everyone is respecting that rule. But it has to be done earlier than later." Last season, allegations circulated that a team or two had over the cost limit, which was subsequently verified by the FIA to be Red Bull. The problem was not settled until the end of that month, when Red Bull entered into an accepted breach agreement with the FIA. Domenicali added, "We are discussing, and this is on the FIA's side, to make sure that the control and the certification will be done much earlier because the effect, if some teams will be over it, has to be done in a proper way in as short a time as possible to be more credible. We see other sports that are tackling the financial regulation with, in my opinion, too long a time for reaction, and this is not good." And Domenicali has every reason to be anxious, at least according to Red Bull. And no, it's not because they think they've overspent again. As according to Red Bull, up to 6 teams may have over the expense ceiling for the fiscal year 2022. In the face of rising prices, Christian Horner claims that at an F1 Commission meeting last year, several teams declared that they will break it. "A danger for 2022 is that there could be 6 teams in breach of the cap," said the team boss. "Energy prices have been exponential, but thankfully we've been protected from that. But there is that chance that several teams, many of which have stated it during F1 Commission meetings, will break the cap this year." Red Bull Motorsport advisor Helmut Marko added, "I think the current status is that 6 teams are over it. Inflation is something that was not calculable to that extent, especially when it comes to energy costs." As for whether Red Bull could be one of those teams, Horner told Auto, Motor and Sport earlier this year, "You could never be 100% sure. But I think that certainly all the aspects that were a reason for us to be over in 2021, which remember, it was the very first year of a set of very complicated regulations. We're confident that we should be comfortably within the cap for 2022. The amount of development we did, and particularly crash damage that we had, was significantly less than our 2 competitors. So obviously, until you've got the certificate, nothing is 100%. But I'd be very surprised if we weren't fully within the cap. This season, the team boss is hopeful that the financing for 2022 may be resolved before the summer break, rather than a few races before the season ends. Hopefully earlier than October, he said. June, July I would have thought would be a realistic target." Red Bull learned of their budget restrict punishment during last year's Mexican Grand Prix, the championship's third to last event. What's your thought? Has Red Bull overspent again? Or are there other teams on the grid that have spent more than they could have afforded? Teams like Aston Martin that did a complete overhaul of their car mid-season? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. If there has been a new breach, they will surely receive a bigger penalty, as Red Bull's 2021 budget limit violation punishment, according to Ferrari team head Fred Vasseur, was marginal, as seen by their 2022-23 performance. Red Bull exceeding the budget cap in 2021, earning a fine and a 10% decrease in aero testing. While most opposing teams believed the punishment was too minor, Red Bull claimed it was draconian and would have a significant impact on them. Whatever the cause, there is little question that the Austrian team supremacy increased in 2022, and is now even bigger in 2023. Ferrari team head Fred Vasseur was questioned whether Red Bull's success indicates that the penalty was too small, or if the team just did a fantastic job. "Both. They did a good job, but still the penalty was very light," Vasseur said. If you consider the rate of development that we have during the season, the fact that if you have a 10% ban at the end, it's not something linear. And then you can spend what you are saving somewhere else on weight saving and so on. I'm not sure the effect is mega. And if you consider that you have an advantage at the beginning of the season because you spend more the year before, I don't want to say that they didn't do a good job, because I honestly think that they did a very good job on the car. So I'm not trying to find an excuse at all, it's not this. But if you ask me if the penalty is too light, I say yes, the Ferrari team boss concluded. Vasseur isn't the only one thinking that the current penalty has been too light. Does this mean that any further penalties will result in bigger consequences? Let's dive in what another former team boss had to say about Red Bull's penalty. Eddie Jordan also believes Red Bull's dominance in the current Formula 1 season indicates the budget restriction is a farce. Red Bull overspent in the 2021 season, the first year the limits were applied, and was fined and had their wind tunnel time restricted. The financial punishment is insignificant for a company the size of Red Bull, but the sports penalty was expected to have serious consequences. They've yet to appear, with the reigning champions once again standing out above the rest this season. Red Bull has won all 3 races so far, and will be the favourites again later this month in Azerbaijan. Jordan, a former F1 team owner, does not see anybody challenging Christian Horner's squad for trophies this season. I would like to say it's too early, but in my heart I think it's done, he said. I just can't see anyone with the strength, knowledge, speed and capacity of Red Bull, and especially the drivers. The challenge is daunting. Jordan went on to say that Red Bull's domination is also an indication that the penalty for their spending violation was ineffective. I think the cost cap is a farce, he continued. Nowadays, if you give somebody a rule, they will get around it. If you push a set of rules in front of a person, they are there to be circumvented. I don't understand the cost cap because I think it's virtually impossible to police. So I can't answer to whether it was unfair on Red Bull, other than the fact that it didn't have the desired effect, because now look at what they've done. I think it's such a big ask to see how anyone is going to compete with Red Bull. Meanwhile, team manager Horner has said repeatedly that he expects the squad to experience the effects of the penalty sooner or later, and that it will become clear that they are suffering later in the year. Everybody's got an opinion, and I think everybody's free to have an opinion, he said. The team have done a great job over the winter on limited wind tunnel time that we've had to develop this car. Of course, that will have an impact later into the year and on next year. So on a snapshot of 3 races, I think it's still hugely premature in terms of this season. There's an awful lot of racing still to go. The budget cap was brought upon Formula 1 to level the playing field. The rules are clear. There is a set budget to spend for the entire year. But this also includes the people working on the grounds. And this has resulted in a negative outcome, as more and more people are leaving F1. People that would have had a huge impact on the grid if it weren't for the budget cap. So because all Formula 1 teams have a financial restriction, racing teams must be inventive in terms of workforce numbers. You can't simply pay engineers more, but you also don't want to lose your finest personnel. Aston Martin concurs that it is a challenging challenge to solve. Engineers with ambition desire to advance, and at some point seek more compensation. Aston Martin profited from this initially by plucking a number of people from Mercedes and Red Bull Racing. But they too must make trade-offs in terms of how the wage house and staff are structured. Team manager Mike Crack, for example, says to Auto Motor and Sport that they must decide whether to hire one individual with a proven track record or 5 recent graduates. Those are very heated discussions we have about that. Of course, you always have to be careful. You always build a house with the foundation first. Those are the graduates. As a result of this, more and more F1 engineers are leaving the sport. Crack contends that graduates represent the future and that they are often quite competent young people. We have these discussions and we don't always agree, he acknowledges. The Luxembourger is especially worried that an increasing number of engineers are moving outside of Formula 1 since they can make more money there. Not just Aston Martin is worried about this. Christian Horner brought it up in a recent meeting with the F1 Commission. It is now up to the FIA to look into any potential issues. Crack considers it a major concern that an increasing number of engineers will work in other sectors. So what are your thoughts? Did Red Bull come off lightly with their penalty? And will the budget cap mean that less talented engineers are going to work in F1? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below.